The lighter clicked before I saw him. That sound split the rain in two, sharp, metallic, final. And for one impossible second, I thought heaven had decided to answer me with something as small and cruel as a spark. I was on my knees in wet gravel, my coat soaked through, my palms muddy where they pressed into the earth in front of Luciana Salvatore's headstone. The flowers I had brought looked ruined already. White roses, ruined by November rain. "Appropriate, please," I whispered, though I didn't know if I was speaking to the woman under the marble or to God, who had been avoiding me for 8 months. "Please, I'm sorry." The cemetery sat high over Naples, where the city lights looked blurred and expensive through the storm. I had chosen that hour because rich families mourned earlier, and guards got lazy in weather like this. I had been wrong about the guards. Men in black coats stood behind the path now, silent and broad in the shoulders, the kind of men who made the rain itself seem afraid to touch them. Then he stepped into my line of sight. Dante Salvatore did not move like other men. He moved like the room had already made space for him before he entered it. Tall. Dark wool coat. No umbrella. Rain clinging to his hair and sliding off the hard line of his jaw. His face was calmer than any grieving son had a right to be, which only made him more frightening. He crouched in front of the grave, not in front of me, and set a glass candle back upright where the wind had nearly knocked it over. The lighter clicked again. Flame trembled to life. Wind rushed through the cypress trees. Without thinking, I cupped both hands around the candle to protect it. My fingers burned. Rain hit my wrists. I didn't move. That was when he looked at me properly. Not at my face first. At my hands, around his mother's flame. I realized too late what I had done. One of the men behind him shifted. "Boss." Dante raised 2 fingers without turning. Silence dropped back into place. I tried to stand and nearly slipped. My stockings were wet through, my knees numb, my throat raw from crying. He rose with terrible ease and watched me sway. I had seen him only once before, in a hospital corridor full of security and panic and expensive shoes. He had not seen me then, or I had prayed he hadn't. Now he did. "Elena Morelli," he said. Hearing my name in his mouth felt worse than hearing a sentence. My lips parted. Usually, it meant mischief with Zost in room 3B, a night you see gleam down harder. It struck the headstones with a sound like 1,000 little verdicts. I should have lied. I should have said I came to pray, that I had loved his mother, that I hadn't meant to trespass. Instead, I looked at the carved dates on Luciana Salvatore's grave and the words beneath them. Beloved mother. Beloved light. And the truth tore out of me because I was too tired to hold it back anymore. I was the one who let her die. The words hung there. One of the men behind Dante inhaled like he'd been offered a reason to break something. Dante didn't move. Not 1 inch. His gaze stayed on mine. Then drifted down again to the candle I was still shielding with stupid, burning hands. "Did you?" he asked. It wasn't anger. It was worse. Real interest. My throat tightened. I was on duty. She asked for privacy. She asked me not to call security yet. She said if I did, more people would die. My voice shook. I thought she was delirious. I thought I had minutes. Rainwater slid into my mouth. I lost 12. He stared at me long enough that I began to hear my own pulse. Then he stepped closer. No man had ever frightened me with stillness before. Noise, yes. Shouting, yes. The snap of temper, yes. But Dante Salvatore frightened me because he did not need any of that. He stood so close I could smell rain, wool, and something colder under it. Not cologne, exactly. Night air. Stone. The outside of danger. My hands were still around the candle. "Move them," he said quietly. I looked down. My knuckles were red from the heat and rain. I pulled back too fast. The flame shivered. He put one broad hand around the glass, shielding it in the exact shape my hands had left behind. He did not look at the candle when he spoke again. "Why come here tonight?" "Because I hear her voice when I try to sleep." I hated how childish that sounded. Hated it more because it was true. and because no one should die with a stranger as the last person in the room. For the first time, something changed in his face. Not softness, something deeper and more dangerous, recognition maybe, or injury. The man on his left, Paolo Ferrante, if I remembered the hospital whispers correctly, muttered, "Boss, this is stupid. We take her or we leave her." Dante's eyes never left mine. "We take her." My stomach dropped. I took one step back. "Please." That was when he gave me the nickname. "Don't run, little flame." Cold, observational, not kind. I stared at him. "Why are you calling me that?" His gaze flicked once to the candle. "Because you'd rather burn your hands than let a dead woman's light go out." Something in me cracked. I had cried before he came. Quiet, ugly, exhausted crying. But that sentence undid me. I covered my mouth and bent forward, a broken animal sound trapped behind my fingers. I hated myself for doing it in front of him. Hated that I could not stop. He did not touch me. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel seen in the worst possible way. When I could breathe again, he said, "Did my mother ask you for anything else?" I thought of the folded note I still had hidden in the lining of my old suitcase. The note I had not opened because opening it felt like a second betrayal. My silence stretched too long. His eyes sharpened. There it was. The first mistake I made after the grave. I looked away. He noticed. Of course he noticed. But instead of pressing me, he turned to Paolo. "Get the car." Paolo swore under his breath and obeyed. I found my voice. "Are you kidnapping me?" Dante glanced once at the headstone. "If I wanted to kidnap you, Elena, you would not ask the questions standing up." Rain rolled off the brim of the cemetery angel above us. Somewhere below, the city kept breathing, indifferent and bright. "I have a job," I said. "An apartment. I can't just disappear." "You already did," he said. Two men moved to either side of me, not touching, hurting, professional. Dante took the candle from the grave, relit it when the wind threatened it again, and set it back with impossible care. Then he looked at Luciana's name, not at me. "Tonight," he said softly, "you belong to the truth." He walked first. Everyone else followed him. I followed last, through rain and mud and iron gates, with my wet shoes slipping over old stone and Luciana Salvatore's grave shrinking behind me in the dark. At the cemetery exit, I looked back once. The candle still burned. Tiny, stubborn, alive. The gate closed behind me. Dante's house did not feel like a home. It felt like a verdict in marble. The villa stood above the bay behind iron gates and dark cypress, all pale stone and long windows and enough silence to make me hear every nervous swallow I took. Men moved through it without wasted steps. Armed, alert, expensively invisible, somewhere deeper inside, a grandfather clock ticked with the kind of confidence only old money and old violence could afford. I was led through a hall lined with saints and family portraits. Luciana Salvatore smiled from 3 different frames. In one, she stood in a lemon grove in a cream dress, hand lifted against the sun. In another, she sat beside a much younger Dante, one hand at the back of his neck like she was blessing him without ceremony. Looking at those portraits while wearing grave mud on my knees made me feel obscene. My room was in the east wing. Large bed. Locked windows. A terrace I could not access because the doors were secured from the outside. Fresh clothes folded on a chair in my size, which frightened me more than if they had guessed wrong. Rosa Conti, the family doctor, arrived before dawn with a tray and a stare sharp enough to peel paint. She was in her 30s, beautiful in the practical way some women are. Hair pinned up with a pencil, plain black dress under a white coat, no softness wasted where nobody had earned it. "Hands," she said. I obeyed. She sat me at a little writing desk and checked the burns on my fingers. "Minor," she muttered. "You're lucky." Lucky was not the word I would have chosen for the night. Rosa glanced up. "If you cry on the bandages, I'll charge extra." A startled laugh almost escaped me. It died when I remembered where I was. You know who I am, I said. Of course I do. She wrapped gauze around my poem. The girl from the hospital. I didn't kill her. Rosa tied the bandage. If Dante thought you killed Luciana, you'd be in the sea. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. When she left, a man appeared with breakfast and looked too unhappy to be carrying a tray of food. He was huge, broad-shedded, clean-shaven, with the exhausted eyes of someone who spent his life solving other people's disasters. Nico Bellini, he said. Driver, logistics, occasional hostage negotiator when the chef starts emotional blackmail. He set down coffee, fruit, toast, and a single slice of lemon cake. Then he stared at the cake like it had personally betrayed him. I looked at him despite myself. Are you all right? He pointed at the cake. That woman is trying to kill me. Rosa? Worse, her aunt. Aunt Morella. She heard I'm doing 16/8 fasting. He lowered his voice like he was discussing a government plot. Now she keeps hiding pastries in my line of sight to test my moral fiber. In this house? In this house, Signorina, moral fiber gets tested daily. That laugh did come out this time. Small, involuntary. Wrong maybe in a place like that. Nico looked absurdly pleased with himself. Good. You're not dead inside. That helps. He started for the door, then turned back inside at the cake again. If Dr. Conti asks, I resisted. If she asks twice, tell her I resisted bravely. The door shut behind him. I ate the cake. At noon, Dante came. No one announced him. The room changed first. That was the only way I knew. The air went still. The silence tightened. Then he was there in the doorway, one hand in his coat pocket, black shirt open at the throat, eyes unreadable. I stood too quickly and almost knocked over the coffee cup. His gaze dropped to the half-eaten cake. Bellini failed again. I blinked. What? A pause. Nothing. He walked in. I hated how aware I became of everything when he was near. The bandage on my hand. The pulse in my neck. The fact that my borrowed sweater hung loose off one shoulder. I tugged it back up. He noticed that too. Of course he did. What do you want from me? I asked. The rest of the truth. I told you what happened. No, he said. You told me what you can survive hearing yourself say. The nerve of that almost made me angry enough to forget fear. I was a resident, I said. Your mother was admitted with respiratory collapse. She was frightened, but not confused. She knew exactly where she was. She asked who was on shift. She asked whether there were police at the elevators. She asked me if I had anyone who depended on me. My mouth went dry. Then she took my hand and said if I called security in the next 12 minutes you would walk into a trap. His face did not change. Not externally, but his stillness altered in a way I had already learned to read as danger. Did she say who? No. Did you believe her? I didn't know what to believe. But you obeyed. I swallowed. Yes. That one syllable sounded like treason. He crossed to the window and looked out over the bay. Men like Dante had the luxury of turning their backs on people. They knew nobody would be stupid enough to take advantage. I stood where I was, clutching my own wrists. She asked me to pray with her, I said. He went very still. She wasn't my mother, I added, and immediately hated myself for how stupid and defensive it sounded. I know that. I just mean, you prayed with her. I nodded. He stood there another moment, then turned. There are rules. Something about the sentence felt older than the room. You do not leave this wing without permission. You do not use a phone unless I allow it. You do not speak to staff about my mother unless I'm present. If anyone but Rosa or Bellini tells you I sent for you, you refuse. I stared. You expect me to agree to this? I expect you to understand it. Why am I here? Witness protection? Interrogation? Punishment? His gaze slid over my face and settled for one unbearable second on my mouth before moving away. Insurance. Against what? I didn't ask. I was learning that questions had edges in his house. He took one step closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to make it hard to remember words in the correct order. You should also understand this, he said. If my mother trusted you enough to make that request, then someone in my world knew she trusted you, which means you are already in danger whether you stay here or not. I hated that he was probably right. I had a life, I said, softer now. His expression did something strange at that. Not pity, recognition maybe, as if lives were things he was used to speaking of in the past tense. You had yesterday, he said. That's different. He turned for the door. Dante. He stopped but didn't look back. I should have asked him what Luciana had been to him before the power, before the name, before the men. I should have asked whether he missed her in ways that made breathing embarrassing. Instead, I said the one thing that had sat like glass in my throat since the cemetery. Why didn't you kill me? He half turned then, enough for me to see the profile of his mouth. Because you cried at her grave like you belonged there, he said, and I haven't decided what that means yet. Then he left. The lock clicked on the other side. I stood in the middle of the east wing, with the taste of lemon cake and fear still in my mouth, and understood with perfect, miserable clarity that my old life had not followed me through the gate. I slept there that night. The first time I left the east wing, it was because a man collapsed at breakfast. I had been given permission to eat in the small family dining room after 2 days of confinement and questioning that never quite felt like questioning. Dante asked little. He listened too well. Paolo Ferrante, his underboss, asked nothing at all, and looked at me like I was a package that might explode if mishandled. The room itself was obscene in the way only inherited wealth can be. Frescoed ceiling, silver coffee service, a long walnut table meant for 20 and occupied by 5. Sunlight cut through the high windows and laid itself over polished wood. Outside, the sea flashed blue and indifferent. I had just lifted my cup when an older man in a charcoal suit swayed beside the sideboard. His hand went to his throat. His face mottled red. No one moved fast enough for me. I was on my feet before the chair legs finished scraping. He's choking. The room snapped to attention. Chairs shoved back. Men half rose, hands automatically going to weapons because that was clearly the answer to everything here. It's not a gun, I said sharply, already behind the man. Don't touch me. I hooked my arms under his ribs and drove upward. Nothing. Again. A piece of prosciutto shot across the polished floor and landed near Paolo's shoe. The old man folded over, coughing violently, tears in his eyes. Silence. Then Nico, from the doorway with an untouched protein shake in his hand, said, Well, if anyone needs me, I'll be in the chapel thanking every saint for inventing chewing. The tension broke just enough for someone to laugh. Short. Disbelieving. The man I'd helped. Carlo Bianchi, the family accountant, I later learned, took his handkerchief and dabbed at his eyes. You have my gratitude, signorina. Cut your food smaller, I said, my own heart still racing. His mouth twitched. When I looked up, Dante was watching me from the head of the table. That gaze did things to the inside of my chest that I deeply resented. He hadn't stood during the crisis. He hadn't needed to. Everyone else had taken their cue from him, even in panic, which told me more about his power than any shouted order could have. Now, he set down his espresso cup with precise care. You're trained for emergency medicine, he said. Internal medicine, technically. You move like an ER doctor. My mother was a waitress, I said before I could stop myself. You learn fast hands in houses where things fall. The words hung there. Too personal. Too revealing. Dante's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in attention. That was how he felt dangerous. Nothing escaped him. Not the stumble in your tone. Not what you revealed by accident and tried to cover with a shrug. Rosa entered moments later, having apparently materialized from stone, and checked Carlo with brisk irritation. You nearly died because you insist on eating like the war ended yesterday. Carlo smiled faintly. It did end, Dottaressa. For normal people, perhaps. Nico drifted in farther behind her. If we're all sharing dietary feedback, I'd like it noted that I remain the victim of organized pastry terrorism. Rosa took one look at him. You ate 3 almond biscuits at dawn. It was tactical weakness, not appetite. Bellini, Paolo said dryly. If you die by biscuit, I'll put it on the death certificate personally. For the first time since the cemetery, I smiled without feeling guilty about it first. Dante saw that too. Later, he found me in the smaller library off the West Hall. I had been staring at a shelf of leather-bound books and pretending not to count exits. The room smelled like old paper and cold stone. Rain had not come that day, but the house held weather in its walls. You handled Bianchi without hesitation, he said from the doorway. I turned. Was I supposed to let him die to stay in character? You're sharper when you're angry. I'm sharper when people are turning blue. His mouth almost moved. Almost. That was not an apology, I said. It was an observation. I folded my arms. I know you think keeping me here protects me. It also makes me look guilty. You look guilty because you carry guilt. That isn't the same thing. No, he said quietly. It isn't. That should have comforted me. It didn't. It made me feel like he was standing far closer to the center of me than I had permitted. I moved toward the shelf just to put something between us. On the low table lay a silver lighter, the same one from the grave. Plain, old, heavy. There was a small nick near the hinge, as if it had once been dropped on stone. I shouldn't have touched it. I did. Metal kissed my fingertips, cool and solid. Careful little flame. I looked up too quickly. He had crossed the room without my hearing it. He took the lighter from my hand, but not before his fingers brushed the bandage on my palm. That touch was nothing. Barely there. My body reacted to it like a match dropped in dry grass. He noticed. God help me, he noticed everything. I took one step back. Your mother gave you that? A pause. Yes. The word felt expensive. What was she like? I asked, before fear could stop me. His jaw hardened, but not against me. Against memory. Unwise, he said after a moment. She believed broken things could still be made useful. I should not have answered the way I did. I knew that as soon as the words left me, maybe she was right. Something shifted across his face then. Not anger. A wound too quick to name. Voices sounded in the corridor. Paolo, low and urgent, a second man answering in rapid Italian. Dante's gaze sharpened. He slipped the lighter back into his pocket and moved to the door. What happened? I asked. He looked over his shoulder. One of my trucks was hit outside Caserta. My stomach tightened. Because of me? He didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. After he left, I stood in the library with my pulse still tripping over itself. My eyes landed on a framed photograph half hidden between the books. Luciana, younger, smiling with a dark-haired girl of maybe 16 in a school uniform. The girl's face was turned partly away. There was something familiar about her shoulders. Before I could study it, Dante returned so suddenly I nearly jumped. His expression gave nothing away. But there was fresh danger in the lines of him. Back to the East Wing, he said. Why? Because whoever poisoned my mother may have started moving before she was buried. The room seemed to tilt. Poisoned. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. You think she was murdered? I know she was. He held the door for me with that same impossible stillness, and I walked past him because I didn't know what else to do, behind me, in the quiet of old books and family ghosts. A truth I had built my guilt around began to crack open. Someone else had been in that room the night Luciana Salvatore died. Dante, he had recognized Elena Morelli the moment she lifted her hands over the candle. Not from the hospital logs, from Luciana's voice, weak with poison and oxygen hunger, making him promise through a garbled voicemail he had heard only after she died. Find the girl with honest eyes. She will be blamed for my choices. Do not let them bury her with me. Dante had kept that to himself for one reason only. In his world, truths got people killed before they got them saved. The first time he touched me on purpose, there was blood in the room. Not mine at first. The villa had a rear kitchen that opened onto a citrus courtyard where Luciana used to supervise preserves every autumn, or so Rosa told me while cutting figs with surgical focus. She had warmed to me in increments so small they were almost theoretical. That afternoon she was teaching me how to tie herb bundles for the pantry because, in her words, if you're going to haunt the East Wing, you may as well earn onions. The kitchen smelled of basil, lemon peel, and simmering stock. It was the first place in the house that felt lived in rather than guarded. Copper pans hung from the walls. Old women from the staff muttered in dialect over pastry dough. One of them patted my cheek like I was a nervous niece. The kindness almost made me cry, which meant I was becoming alarmingly unstable. Nico appeared in the doorway carrying crates of bottled water and looking offended by life. "I need witnesses," he announced. "Rosa, just her." He came back for me with blood on his sleeve. "Move," he said. And there was no room in that voice for anything except survival. I moved. He got me into the second car while Paolo laid down cover fire and Nico shouted something deeply obscene about the structural integrity of imported sedans. We tore away from the overpass with one headlight gone and rain sheeting across the windshield. My ears still rang. My hands would not stop shaking. Only when we hit the coastal road did I see how badly Dante was bleeding. The black of his coat hid most of it, but not all. A dark bloom spread under his ribs every time the car jolted. "You're hurt." It missed anything useful. That is not a medical term. It is tonight. Paolo glanced in the mirror, face pale under streetlight. "Save the flirtation, both of you. We're 3 minutes out." I stared at him. "This is flirtation to you?" Nico's voice crackled over the radio from the lead car. "If nobody's dying romantically, I'd appreciate a less stressful category of emergency." Even bleeding, Dante looked like he might almost smile. The safe house sat above the sea in an abandoned customs villa, all shuttered windows and salt-whitened stone. Inside it smelled like dust, rain, and old wood swollen by winters. Nobody had paid to repair. Men spread through the rooms. Rosa turned one lamp on and transformed the dining table into a triage station in under 30 seconds. Paolo had a graze across his shoulder. One guard had taken a bullet through the calf. Dante said nothing at all until Rosa pointed at his side and swore. "Coat off." "I'm fine. You are leaking on my floor." He looked ready to argue. Then his gaze met mine and something in him recalculated. He shrugged out of the coat. The shirt beneath was soaked through. I had seen injured men before. Plenty. But training in fluorescent hospitals had not prepared me for Dante Salvatore braced with one hand on a chair, rain still in his hair, shirt peeled back from muscle and scar and a fresh groove torn along his side by a bullet that had kissed and kept going. Not fatal. Not shallow enough to ignore. Rosa tossed gloves at me. "Well, doctor?" I caught them automatically. Dante's eyes lifted. "No." Rosa didn't even turn her head. "Be quiet. She shouldn't, she should because Paolo's still bleeding. Bellini's pretending his blood pressure is spiritual warfare, and you trust her hands whether you enjoy admitting it or not." Silence. Dante looked at me. I looked back. My pulse felt wild enough to bruise. "I can do it," I said softly. He held my gaze 1 second longer, then sat. So I cleaned the wound. The world narrowed to gauze, antiseptic, torn flesh, the hard line of his breathing under my hand. He barely moved when I irrigated it, barely flinched when I stitched. That restraint unsettled me more than pain would have. The lamp threw gold over the scars on his torso. An old knife wound low on the left, a puckered mark under one shoulder blade, a pale circle near his sternum that looked like a bullet he had not outrun in time. "Who taught you to be this calm?" I asked before I could stop myself. "You assume I am calm." "You are." "No," he said. "I am contained." The needle slipped fractionally in my fingers. He noticed that too, of course he did. Rosa barked from the other side of the room, where Paolo was being wrapped like a hostile mummy. "If either of you start saying meaningful things while I'm busy, I'll throw something." Nico, seated on a windowsill with a bandage around his hand and a protein bar he looked at with despair, sighed. "No, Doctor, in my defense, I was nearly martyred. You scraped your knuckles on a door. It was an emotionally difficult door. Against my will, I smiled. Dante saw the smile and went still in a completely different way. When the last stitch was tied, I pressed fresh gauze to his side and realized my hand was shaking again. Not from fear now, from proximity. From the heat of him and the terrible awareness of how carefully he was letting me do this. I'm done, I whispered. His hand closed over my wrist before I could step back. Not hard, not trapping, just there. I looked up. Rain tapped the shutters. Somewhere downstairs, a guard checked a weapon. The room around us blurred. You should hate me, I said, because the truth had been pushing against my teeth for hours. For the phone. For the grave. For all of it. And I don't understand why you don't. His thumb shifted once against the inside of my wrist. My pulse leaped into it like betrayal. I did try, he said. The honesty in that struck so deep I had to look away. He let go slowly. I should have walked across the room. I should have found Rosa, checked Paolo, done anything sensible. Instead, I stood there between his knees, with my gloves still on, and said the most dangerous thing I had said to him yet. I don't know what this is. His voice went low. Neither do I. That was worse than confidence. That was an edge with nothing under it. I took off the gloves. One finger at a time. Bought myself seconds. If you send me away now, I said, not looking at him, I think it will feel like falling. No declaration. No boldness. Just the humiliating little truth. The silence after it changed shape. He rose. One hand came to my face, not the mouth this time. My cheek. His palm warm, rough, careful as if he was approaching something skittish that mattered. Elena. It was the first time he had said my name like it hurt him. I did not move away. That was my consent. That was all I had. His forehead touched mine first. A pause. A question he would never ask aloud. Then his mouth brushed mine. Not hunger. Not conquest. A kiss restrained so hard it nearly broke me with its gentleness. I felt him stop himself inside it. Felt the tremor of want he refused to turn into pressure. When he drew back, I made the smallest sound, embarrassed by my own disappointment. His eyes closed once. Little flame, he said against my mouth. Warmer now, wrecked around the edges. You make men foolish. I should have laughed. I nearly cried. He kissed me once more, deeper by a fraction, and then he stepped back first. Restraint. Again. Rosa walked in at that exact second, carrying a tray of syringes, and froze. Excellent. Everyone's bleeding and now you're dramatic too. Nico leaned around the doorway. I knew it. Near death always ruins a fasting schedule. I covered my face. Dante turned away before anyone could see what had cracked in his composure. Dante. It was not her mouth. Not first. Not her softness, or the way fear never made her cruel. It was the grave. The rain. The way she put her bare hands around a dying flame when every instinct should have told her to protect herself instead. No one in his world did that. No one chose the fragile thing first. He had been lost from that moment and had hated the truth of it ever since. Near dawn, Paolo came in with salt spray on his coat and murder in his eyes. We intercepted chatter from Vittorio's side, he said. This was no warning shot. Dante buttoned his shirt over fresh bandages, each movement precise despite the pain. Say it. Paolo looked at me once, then back at him. Your uncle has called the council. By tomorrow night, he'll either have your seat or your body. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the sea. Dante's face became unreadable again. He reached into his pocket, took out the silver lighter, and clicked it open and shut once. Metal. Flame withheld. I looked at the nick near the hinge. He looked at the dark beyond the shutters. When he spoke, his voice held no uncertainty at all. Then war has arrived. War made the villa smaller. Not in shape. In breadth. Men filled the corridors in quiet shoes with radios pressed to their mouths. Windows stayed shuttered through daylight. Deliveries were unpacked in the courtyard by armed guards who watched the hills while old women sorted tomatoes. Even the dogs sensed it. They stopped barking for strangers and started growling at the wind. I learned the geography of fear in 2 days. The west gate was reinforced after dawn. 2 cars were burned on the lower road by noon. By evening, Paolo was carrying maps into Dante's study with the same expression surgeons wore before telling a family they had done all they could. Nobody said Vittorio's name often, but it lived in every room anyway. I also learned what closeness to Dante cost. It cost sleep, appetite, the ability to hear footsteps without my body bracing for impact. It cost him too, though he would never have phrased it that way. Men came to him with numbers, routes, shipments, loyalties. He absorbed every decision like damage. He never complained. That only made watching him worse. On the 3rd morning, Paolo took a bullet meant for me. We had moved to the interior hall for breakfast because Rosa declared the dining room windows a tactical insult. The house smelled of espresso and gun oil. Nico was explaining with solemn outrage that his mother had called to ask whether Rosa was finally feeding him enough iron to marry into medicine when the first shot cracked through the stained glass over the staircase. Paolo saw the laser before any of us. He hit me hard enough to send my shoulder into the marble pillar. Pain burst white. Then he was on one knee in front of me, blood spreading through his jacket. Everything after that broke at once. Guards rushing, Rosa swearing, Nico hauling me behind an overturned console table, while still somehow shouting toward the ceiling. If I die before Abs, I'll haunt everybody here. Paolo gritted his teeth and looked down at his own chest like betrayal had become physical. It missed the heart, I said, already beside him. How comforting, he muttered. Dante appeared at the far end of the corridor and fired once through the shattered window. A body dropped from the olive terrace outside. He did not check to see if the man stayed down. He was already turning, already scanning for a second shooter, already placing himself between me and the next line of fire. I worked on Paolo with Rosa kneeling opposite me. Entry wound high right shoulder. Bad angle. Lucky angle. He stayed conscious out of what I suspected was spite. At one point he caught my wrist. His face was gray but his voice held. Listen to me. No, Elena. I looked up. If he tells you to go, Paolo said through clenched teeth, you go. Rosa snapped. That is enough noble nonsense from the bleeding. But I heard it anyway. Later, after Paolo was stabilized and carried into the downstairs guest suite, Dante found me on the service stairs with my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I had not drunk. My shoulder throbbed where Paolo had thrown me clear. He stood 1 step below me, not touching. Not close enough for comfort, which told me immediately this conversation would hurt. You're leaving tonight. I stared at him. No. His expression did not change. This is not a debate. You don't get to decide that for me. I decide what risks happen under my roof. And I decide whether I keep running from the same 12 minutes for the rest of my life. That landed. I saw it. He came up 1 stair. This is no longer about guilt. No, I said, my voice shaking. It's about the fact that your world reaches into every room I stand in now. And that is precisely why you leave it. The cruelty of his logic was that it made sense. I hated him for making sense. Rosa interrupted before I could answer. Bellini has the papers. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a passport under a different name, train tickets to Florence, cash, and a folded letter on cream stationery bearing Luciana Salvatore's seal. I unfolded it with numb fingers. If you are reading this, my son has done the thing he always does when he loves anything alive. He has mistaken distance for protection. Florence. Santa Chiara Clinic. They owe me several favors and 1 moral debt. Go if you must. Stay only if you can live with seeing him clearly. My vision blurred. Luciana arranged this? I whispered. Rosa nodded. Months ago, she knew he would need at least 1 person in his life willing to disobey him intelligently. From the landing below, Nico lifted a duffel and gave me a pained half salute. The station route is clean for now. Also, for the record, I object to driving women towards sensible decisions. It feels against the spirit of the house. Dante said nothing. That frightened me more than command would have. By dusk, I was in the back of Nico's car with the envelope on my lap and the estate shrinking behind us. The city slid by in copper light and scooter noise and church bells carrying over wet streets. My shoulder ached. My mouth still remembered the careful pressure of Dante's kiss in the safe house. My chest felt scraped hollow. Nico drove one-handed, muttering at traffic. Rosa says if I stop for pastry, she'll revoke my right to complain medically. I laughed, despite the ache in my throat. His eyes softened in the mirror. You know he's doing this because he thinks staying alive is a thing he can enforce. I know. He's bad at the soft parts. I know. He gets it from his mother, and from being raised by wolves in expensive shoes. That nearly broke me. At the ferry slip, the wind smelled like diesel and salt. Nico unloaded my bag but did not hand it over right away. There are only two kinds of brave in our line of work, he said. The kind that leaves, and the kind that comes back with eyes open. Don't confuse them. I looked at the boarding gate, at the ticket in my hand. At the future Luciana had left me, clean, practical, survivable. Then I looked back at the road we had come down. I thought of Paolo falling in front of me, of Dante in the pantry, saying his mother had tried to save him, of the grave, the flame, the impossible gentleness of a man built for war, stopping himself because I mattered more than what he wanted. Leaving was possible, real. No locked door behind me, no gun at my back. It cost me something to turn away from it. I took my hospital ID from my wallet, the old one, Elena Morelli, resident physician. I looked at my face in the plastic and understood that if I boarded the ferry, I could still be that woman. Hurt, yes. Haunted, yes. But outside, instead, I bent the card until it cracked. Nico closed his eyes. Madonna. Take me back. Elena. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. And for the first time in this story, it was true, and it is a terrible idea. Take me back. He studied me one long second, then nodded once. On the drive uphill, I rolled down the window and let the salt wind hit my face until my eyes stopped burning. When the estate gates opened again, Dante was already standing in the courtyard, as if he had known the exact second I would return. I got out before Nico could come around. Dante looked at the broken ID card in my hand, then at me. You should have gone. Yes, I said. I should have. Rain began in a fine silver line between us. He did not come closer. Neither did I, but something larger than either of us crossed the distance anyway. I walked back into the dark with my eyes open. After I chose to stay, everything sharpened. Not because the danger grew. It had always been there, but because I had stopped pretending I stood outside it. Dante did not thank me for returning. He did not apologize for sending me away. That was the strange mercy of him. He treated choice like something sacred enough not to decorate with speeches. Instead, he moved me from the east wing to a room near his own and doubled the interior guards. It should have felt like surrender. It felt like being counted. Rosa was the first to say what the house had begun to understand. You look steadier, she told me while checking Paolo's dressings. More unhappy, but steadier. Paolo, pale against the pillows and entirely too alive to be pleasant about it, gave me a look that held reluctant respect. You came back. I did. Questionable judgment. Consistent, though. The corner of his mouth moved. That was Paolo laughing. That night, Carlo Bianchi asked for me. He was in the accounting office off the south corridor, the one with locked cabinets and a perpetual smell of ink and old paper. I had seen him only briefly since the breakfast incident. He looked older now. Smaller somehow. His hands shook when he poured tea. I owe you honesty, he said. Alarm prickled low in my spine. About what? His eyes went red before the tears arrived. That frightened me more than if he had started shouting. My daughter, he said. Vittorio took her boy 2 months ago. My grandson, 8 years old, asthma, likes trains. I went cold. Carlo, I moved money, he said, voice splintering. I altered routes. Nothing that would kill anyone, I told myself. Nothing direct. Then Luciana found the discrepancies. He looked down at his own hands. She told me Dante would forgive fear, but never hidden rot. I believed her. I was going to confess. The room seemed to recede. Did you poison her? He flinched. No. On my son's grave, no. But I told Vittorio she was looking. And after that, he swallowed hard. After that, events moved faster than my courage. I should have called for Dante. I know that. I knew it then. But Carlo was weeping in front of me, and all I could see was an old man who had let the worst people in the room borrow his fear. So I did what I always did when pain presented itself in a human shape. I stepped closer. We tell Dante now, I said, and then we get your grandson back. Carlo looked up at me with an expression I mistook for hope. That was my mistake. The cloth hit my mouth before I understood what he had done. Bitter chemical burn. My body lurched backward into him, tea shattering on tile. I fought. Harder than he expected. My elbow caught his jaw. He made a sound like grief torn in half. I'm sorry, he sobbed as darkness rushed in. I'm sorry, Signorina. He said only you. He said if I brought only you, the boy lives. When I woke, my wrists were tied to an iron chair in a wine cellar. Cold stone under my bare feet. Damp in the air, one bulb overhead buzzing weakly enough to make shadows twitch. My head pounded, my mouth tasted chemical and fear. Across from me sat Carlo's grandson. Alive, small, thin, wrapped in a wool coat 2 sizes too big, inhaler clutched in one hand like a weapon. His eyes were enormous in the dim light. Well, that changed things. Hey, I said, keeping my voice level despite the panic kicking at my ribs. What's your name? Tommaso. Hi, Tommaso. I'm Elena. He nodded solemnly. Grandpa said you're a doctor. I am. His lower lip trembled. He said not to cry because bad men like it. My heart nearly stopped. Your grandpa was right about that, I said gently. So we won't give them the satisfaction. The cellar door opened. Vittorio Salvatore entered with the quiet confidence of an older man who had built his whole life on being underestimated. Silver hair, tailored coat, rosary around one wrist like religion had become jewelry. His face was not as hard as Dante's. That made him worse. He looked like the kind of man who would sponsor hospitals and bury evidence under the ribbon cutting. Elena Morelli, he said. My brother's widow had a talent for collecting strays. You poisoned her. He smiled faintly. I corrected a weakness in the family structure. The hatred that rose in me felt clean. He looked at Tommaso and sighed as if children were administrative burdens. The boy breathes easier with company. See, I am not without mercy. Mercy does not drug women and tie them to chairs. No, he said. Mercy is making hard decisions before sentimental people ruin everyone. There it was. The mirror, not Dante, the version of power stripped of every human cost. Carlo won't survive this, I said. A shrug. He survived too long already. The words hit the corner of the room before I understood them. Then Carlo staggered into view behind Vittorio, blood at his temple, hands bound. He looked at Tommaso once and broke. I told you the girl only, he whispered. And yet you still hoped, Vittorio said almost kindly. He nodded to one of the men beside the door. The gunshot was deafening underground. Tommaso screamed. I did not. I could not. The scream lodged somewhere under my ribs and stayed there, hot enough to burn. Carlo crumpled at the threshold with his face turned toward the boy. Vittorio crouched in front of me. This is why your Dante loses, he said softly. He keeps mistaking tenderness for strategy. He is not my Dante. Vittoria's gaze sharpened. No? Then why did you come back? I said nothing. He smiled as if silence confirmed everything he wanted. After he left, I tested the ropes until skin burned off my wrists. No use. So I changed tactics. Tommaso's breathing was turning fast and shallow in the corner. Listen to me, I said. Where's your inhaler? He lifted it with shaking fingers. Good. Good boy. I need you to breathe out first. All the way, then press. While I coached him, I twisted the iron chair inch by inch toward the broken bottleneck Carlo had dropped during the struggle. The glass glinted near a drain in the stone floor. Too far. Maybe not too far if I kept talking. Above us, somewhere beyond the cellar, I heard engines. Too late, I thought, or right on time. The bulb overhead flickered once, twice, and then the whole room went black. In the dark, fear changes shape. It gets practical. The second the bulb died, Tommaso made a panicked sound in the corner. "Elena, I'm here," I said. "Don't move." My own voice steadied me. So did the cold stone under my feet, the rough bite of rope against my wrists, the remembered layout of the room from the few dim minutes I'd had. Door on the left, drain in front, broken bottleneck near the chair leg. Men shouted upstairs, not alarm exactly. Impact. I drove the chair sideways and let it crash to the floor with me in it. Pain burst through my shoulder. Good. I was still conscious. I wriggled, twisted, found the shard by touch, and began sawing at the rope with tiny brutal movements that flayed skin. "Tommaso," I whispered, "count for me." "What?" "Any number. Loud enough that I know where you are. Quiet enough that they don't." He started with 6 for some reason and kept going in a trembling little voice. The sound cut through the dark better than prayer. Footsteps hit the cellar stairs. Not one man. Several. The first body through the door went down before I saw anything at all. Just the grunt, the impact, the specific, heavy silence that followed a kill too clean to argue with. Then muzzle flash lit the room in white stutters. I saw Dante in fragments. Shoulder turned, gun steady, coat open. Face emptied of everything except purpose. He looked less like a man than the judgment men invented to explain their last mistake. Paolo came behind him, pale but upright, fury held together by stitches and will. Nico was somehow there too, half crouched with a weapon in one hand, and Tommaso's inhaler in the other. "Madonna, I hate basements," Nico announced to no one in particular. "Nothing good has ever happened in a basement except maybe wine. And I don't even drink on missions." A laugh tried to tear its way out of me. It came out as a sob instead. Dante heard that. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped to one knee, and cut my wrists free. His hands went to my face so fast and so carefully, it broke something open in me. "You hurt?" I shook my head, though I was shaking everywhere. "Liar." That should have sounded harsh. Instead it sounded wrecked. Tommaso ran to Paolo, who scooped him one-armed and passed him straight to Nico with a muttered curse about evacuation routes. Nico took the child without argument, which was how I knew the situation was truly dire. Dante's forehead touched mine for one hard second, a reunion with no room for tenderness and too much feeling anyway. I began. "I know." He stood, hauled me up with him, and put me behind his body all in one motion. I should have resented being moved like that. Instead, safety hid me so hard it was almost humiliating. We reached the outer corridor just as Vittorio's men opened fire from the tasting room. Stone splintered. Paolo dragged Tommaso and Nico toward the service exit while Dante shoved me behind a cask. I grabbed his sleeve. "Wait." He looked back. "There are 2 more in the upper gallery," I said, "and Vittorio keeps a second door behind the press wall, left side." His eyes locked on mine. Surprise, pride, something even more dangerous than either. "Stay low, little flame." He and Paolo moved at once. I didn't stay low for long. One of Vittoria's men came through the smoke with a knife and a bad expression. I caught his wrist, used the cask edge to break his grip, and drove my knee where anatomy had always intended it to matter most. He folded. I took his radio and smashed it under my heel. By the time I turned back, Vittorio was retreating through the hidden press door. Dante shot one man at the hinge and went after him. I followed the blood, not Dante's. Paolo's shoulder had opened again. He swore in 3 dialects while trying not to drop Tommaso. "Give him to me," I said. Paolo looked horrified. "You are not carrying a hostage child through a gunfight." Then stop bleeding on my shoes and move." Nico made a sign of the cross. I love when she talks like the boss. It's terrible for my nerves. We got out through the service yard and into the rain-thick dark behind the winery. Men were down across the gravel. Headlights cut through olive trees. Somewhere below, the sea hit rock in heavy black rhythm. Dante emerged 5 minutes later without Vittorio. The look on his face told me enough. "He got away," Paolo said. "For tonight," Dante answered. There was blood on his knuckles that wasn't his own. A bruise rising along his jaw. He looked at me like he was making sure I existed all the way down to bone. Then he came close. Too close for anyone else to misunderstand. One hand at the back of my neck. One breath shared between us in the wet dark. I put my palm flat over his heart because I needed proof of something alive. It hammered under my hand. Paolo looked away. Nico did not. Nico looked delighted and exhausted at once. "Excellent. We're doing wonging in a parking area. Everyone remain clinically insane." Tommaso, now bundled in Paolo's coat, whispered, "Is he going to kill my grandpa's boss?" No one answered. Back at the villa, after Rosa took Tommaso upstairs and Paolo finally submitted to being restitched, Dante found me in the small library where all of this had first changed shape. He shut the door behind him. Rain streaked the windows. Somewhere in the house, Tommaso finally stopped crying. "There was a ledger at the winery," he said. "Moved before we got there. Vittorio wants the council before dawn tomorrow." I nodded. He took the silver lighter from his pocket and set it on the table between us. Then he placed a second item beside it, a charity file from Luciana's foundation. My name was on it. I stared. "Your first year of medical school," he said. "Paid anonymously after your mother died." I looked up too fast. "Luciana knew my mother?" "Your mother cleaned one of our legal offices for 5 years," he said. "When she got sick, Luciana covered the hospice bills. After she died, she paid your tuition because she said a girl with hands like yours should not be lost to debt." I sat down because my knees had become theoretical. All this time, all this guilt, all this terrible orbit around a woman who had already altered my life before the hospital room ever happened. Why didn't you tell me? Because I only confirmed it tonight. I looked at the file, at my own life rearranged by a dead woman's quiet mercy. Dante crouched in front of me. "If Vittorio takes the council," he said, voice roughened by fatigue and something older, "there may not be a house left to bring you back to." My throat closed. I touched his face. Bruise under jaw, rain still cold in his hair. "For the record," Nico yelled faintly from the corridor. "If anybody dies tomorrow, I'd like it noted I never got to eat the emergency tiramisu." Dante's mouth almost broke. I leaned forward and kissed him before fear could stop me. This time he kissed me back like a starving man with a lock on the door, and one last thread of discipline still intact. When we finally pulled apart, tomorrow stood between us like a blade. One of us might not survive it. The final violence began where Luciana had once hidden offerings for the poor. The chapel of St. Michael stood above San Lorenzo, built into the cliffside with a bell tower that looked older than memory, and a crypt below it that had served over generations as prayer room, storage room, and when necessary, meeting ground for men too rich to call themselves criminals out loud. Luciana had kept the foundation keys because she funded restorations there every spring. Vittorio had chosen it for the council because older men loved symbols when they thought they owned history. Dante chose it because the crypt had only 2 exits, and Paolo knew both. We went before dawn. I wore black because everyone else did, and because there are mornings when color feels obscene. Rosa strapped a medical kit across my shoulder and fixed me with the stare usually reserved for people attempting self-surgery. "You are not a soldier." "No," I said. "I'm worse. I'm useful." Nico, loading extra magazines into the car, sighed dramatically. If anyone asks later, I objected to all of this and was overruled by intense people. Tommaso had been taken to a secure apartment under Rosa's cousin's name before sunrise. Paolo had personally carried him to the car despite fresh stitches. When he came back, he handed Dante a folded paper. "What's that?" I asked. Paolo's face stayed unreadable. "List of names. men who switch sides if Vittorio falls. Dante took it but did not open it. The ride to the chapel was silent except for the road and the occasional click of Dante's lighter. Open then shut, though he never lit it. Habit. Focus. A sound that now lived under my skin. At the lower gate, the sea wind hit hard enough to drag at coats. Bells from a distant church counted an hour no one would keep honestly. Inside the crypt, the council had already gathered. Men in dark suits, family rings, expensive shoes on old stone. Vittorio stood at the far end beneath a carved saint with a sword in one hand and judgment in the other. He looked almost gentle in candlelight. That was his talent. To make brutality appear administrative. "Elena Morelli," he said when he saw me. "Still collecting danger, I see. I learned from your family." His eyes narrowed, amused despite himself. Dante stepped in front of me without flourish. A placement, not a display. The room reacted to him before anyone spoke. Heads turned, shoulders tightened. Men who had already chosen their loyalties pretended they had not. Vittorio opened his hands. "Nephew, we can end this cleanly. Hand over Luciana's note, the girl, and the remaining roots. I will allow you exile." The silence that followed was almost embarrassed for him. Dante's voice was flat. "You poisoned my mother in a hospital bed." Vittorio's expression never shifted. "I corrected a succession problem." "There it is," Paolo muttered. One of the councilmen crossed himself. Vittorio took one step forward. "Your mother made you weak. She taught you to hesitate. She brought strays into a structure built on certainty. Look where it led." His gaze flicked to me. The mistake was small. Fatal anyway. Dante moved first. Gunfire in a crypt sounds different. Heavier. Like stone itself remembers. Men hit the floor. Candles blew out in the concussion. Nico cursed with great feeling while dragging a bishop's chair into cover, and loudly informing St. Michael that this was not how he intended to meet the afterlife. The fight shattered into pieces. Paolo took the left exit with 3 men. Dante drove center. I dropped beside a fallen councilman whose femoral bleed would kill him in minutes, and clamped pressure before I even finished thinking. Useful. Worse than a soldier. One of Vittoria's guards came through the smoke toward Dante's blind side. I grabbed the nearest brass stand and swung. Metal cracked bone. The man went down hard. Dante looked back once. Only once. But the look held everything. Shock, fury, a wild kind of gratitude he would never say in front of witnesses. We advanced by inches. At the rear altar, Vittorio disappeared through the crypt arch into the upper chapel. Dante followed. I followed Dante because, at this point, my survival instincts had become a matter for theological review. The upper chapel smelled of wax, seawater, and old incense. Gray dawn leaked through stained glass. Vittorio stood by Luciana's memorial candle rack, with a gun trained not on Dante, but on me. Of course. "Blood or sentiment," he said to Dante. "Choose correctly for once." Dante stopped. In that stillness, I saw the whole shape of the man he might have become. Cold, family logic, necessary sacrifice, one life measured against an empire. Vittorio wore that future like a well-tailored coat. I also saw Dante refuse it. He lowered his own weapon. My breath stopped. Vittorio smiled. Then Dante took the silver lighter from his pocket and flicked it once. Click. Not flame. Sound. Every eye in the room moved by instinct to the hand, the gesture, the old familiar rhythm of a man about to light something. That was all Paolo needed. From the side sacristy door, stitched shoulder and all, he fired once. Vittoria's gun jerked wide. The bullet took the stained glass panel instead of my heart. Dante closed the distance before the glass finished falling. He did not shout, he did not threaten. He hit Vittorio hard enough to drive both men into the candle rack. Metal crashed. Wax splattered. The saint's red glass halo shattered over stone. They fought ugly and close, like men who shared blood and hated the dead of it. Vittorio went for Dante's old wound. Dante answered with the kind of efficiency I had first seen under the overpass. No wasted rage, no speech, just the final terrible competence of a man ending what should never have survived this long. When it was over, Vittorio lay against the altar steps with one hand still clawing at his rosary. Dante stood above him, breathing hard. The room had gone silent, except for the sea. Vittorio laughed once, blood in his teeth. "Your mother would hate what you are now." Dante looked at him for a very long second. Then he said the truest thing in the chapel. "No, she'd hate what you made of love." He fired once. Afterward, nobody moved. Then Dante bent, picked up the ledger Vittorio had dropped from inside his coat, and opened it. Names, judges, routes, payoffs. Enough poison to keep the whole machine alive another generation. He looked at Paolo, at the councilmen, at me. Then he held the ledger over the fallen candles. "Dante," Paolo said, startled. He clicked the lighter. This time he used the flame. Paper caught fast. Gasps rippled through the chapel as decades of leverage blackened and curled. Dante did not look away. That was the cost. Not just an uncle. A throne. Protection. The old guarantee that blood and dirt could always purchase another tomorrow. When the ledger collapsed into ash, the war ended with it. He came to me through smoke and stained glass dust, touched my cheek with a hand that shook only once, and said the words the whole house had been waiting for. "It is over." After war, the house sounded wrong. Too quiet in some places, too alive in others. Men still guarded the gates, but fewer. Radios murmured instead of snapped. The dog slept again in the afternoon sun. In the kitchen, Aunt Morella resumed her campaign against Nico's fasting with renewed theological conviction, and life, obscene, practical life, returned in fragments no one had permission to trust yet. Paolo wore his arm in a sling and used it mostly to point at other people's incompetence. Tommaso and his mother were gone north under new names. Rosa said Carlo's daughter had cried for an hour when she learned what her father had done and what it had cost. Nobody knew how to hold a story like that cleanly. We did not try. I moved through the villa differently now, not because it had become safe. It had not. But because I had chosen it, and chosen things sit and the body another way. I slept in Dante's room more nights than not, though the first week we mostly just slept. Backs touching sometimes. Hands finding each other in the dark like separate confessions. He still stopped himself. Still treated want like something he owed me protection from as much as pleasure. I began to understand that his restraint was not absence. It was care sharpened to the point of ache. One afternoon in early spring, Rosa dragged me to the old gatehouse overlooking the lower road. "It's ugly," she said. "It's a ruin." Exactly. Potential. The building had once housed vineyard accounts, and then weapons, and then dust. Now workers moved through it with plaster buckets and new windows. On the far wall, someone had already painted it white. Rosa handed me a brass key. I stared at it. "What is this? Your clinic," she said. Luciano wanted one on the estate for workers' families in the village on the hill. Dante pretended he needed 6 weeks to consider the security implications. Then he approved it in 6 minutes and argued about parking for dignity. I laughed so suddenly it hurt. "She wrote it into the foundation plans years ago," Rosa added. "He is terrible at admitting when he likes his mother's ideas." The key sat warm and heavy in my palm. That evening I found Dante in the study with the balcony doors open to the sea wind. No council maps now, no war boards, just ledgers of legal businesses, port transfers, and the letters of men newly respectful because fear had changed owners. He looked tired in the human way, not the hunted one. I had begun to love him hardest when he looked human. He looked up when I entered and immediately tracked the key in my hand. "Rosa told you?" She ambushed me with opportunity. That sounds like her. I came farther in. A clinic? For the estate, the Hill District, women who don't want questions asked, children who can't afford private care. He paused. "You said once that no one should die with a stranger as the last person in the room." My throat tightened. "So you built me a place to be impossible and professionally." "I built you a place to be exactly what you are." The room held stillness for a beat too long. Then I crossed it and kissed him, because sometimes gratitude and love became indistinguishable in the body. His hand settled at my waist, warm, careful, familiar now in ways that still startled me. When I leaned closer, he made a rough, low sound that told me restraint had not become easier with time. "Dante," I whispered. He touched his forehead to mine. "Say it." I almost laughed. "You demanding words? What apocalypse is this?" His mouth curved. Barely. Beautifully. "Say it anyway." I swallowed. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. And if that ever changes, I'll tell you before fear does." Something in his face gave way then. Not dramatically. That wasn't him. Just enough that I could see the man under the armor and the cost of wearing it for so long. He reached into his pocket. For one foolish second, I thought of the lighter. Instead, he brought out a ring, not a glittering fantasy. A plain old family gold band with one small diamond and faint engraving worn soft inside from years of being held more than worn. "Luciana's," I realized with a jolt. "She meant to leave it to no one," he said, "because she said jewelry turns daughters cruel." A pause. "I'm ignoring her." I stared at the ring in his palm. "This is not a fairy tale," he said quietly. "I will never lie to you that way. My world stays dangerous, my name stays heavy. There will be mornings when I come home with blood on me, and evenings when you hate what I had to do to get back to you." His voice lowered. "But if you want the truth of me, little flame, then take this and make a life with the parts of me that are still worth having." I cried immediately, which felt on brand by now. He exhaled like my tears injured him personally. "Yes," I said, wiping at my face and only making it worse. "That was not elegant, and I'm sorry, but yes." He slid the ring onto my finger with hands steadier than mine. From the hall, Nico's voice floated in before either of us could recover any dignity. "Rosa owes me €50. I said spring engagement, she said late summer. Also, if there's kissing, please remember some of us are trying to maintain electrolytes." Dante closed his eyes. I laughed against his throat. Later, in the kitchen, Aunt Morella made gnocchi, the size of clouds, and pretended not to cry into the sauce. Paolo accepted a second glass of wine, as if generosity had become a minor tactical failure. Rosa touched Nico's wrist when she passed him the bread and left her hand there a second too long. He looked at it like he had been canonized. Ordinary things. Plates. Steam. People reaching without flinching. At the end of the night, Dante brushed a thumb over the ring once more and called me Little Flame, like the word belonged inside a home now. The kettle sang on the stove. 8 months later, the rain came back, not as a storm this time, as a patient gray fall over Naples, soft enough to silver the cypress and darken the marble paths at the cemetery, without turning the world cruel, the kind of rain that asks for umbrellas and gets ignored by stubborn people. I went to Luciana's grave every month. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Rosa after the clinic closed early and she had energy left to insult the flower arrangements. Sometimes with Tommaso and his mother when they could travel safely under their new names. And sometimes, increasingly often, with Dante, who pretended he came for the silence and not because grief had become easier to carry when it had company. The clinic at the old gatehouse had been open 6 months. We saw vineyard workers, fishermen's children, exhausted mothers, old men who lied about their blood pressure, girls from the Hill District who wanted care without shame attached to it. I had never gone back to my residency. Some losses remain losses even when you choose them. But on certain afternoons, with salt air through the shutters and Luciana's foundation name above the door, I understood that choosing a different life had not made me less myself. Only more honest. Dante changed too. Not into safety, not into softness people could mistake for weakness. He still walked into rooms and made armed men rearrange their breathing. He still came home some nights with that terrible, useful stillness on him. But he laughed more now, usually at Nico, who had abandoned fasting after Rosa kissed him in the pantry and declared carbohydrates medically indicated for emotional resilience. He slept with one hand on me if nightmares had been bad, He listened when I said no to certain meetings in the house and yes to others. He learned, in the awkward, expensive way of damaged men, that being loved was not the same as being forgiven in advance. We stopped at the grave in the rain with white camellias and fresh candles. Dante crouched first to clear leaves from the stone. I watched the broad shape of him in a black coat, rain beating in his hair, and thought the same impossible thought I always did. He looks most dangerous when he is gentle. He set the flowers down. I took one of the glass candles from the bag and knelt to light it before the rain could argue. Dante handed me the silver lighter without a word. Click. That sound still moved through me like memory given a body. I lit the wick. The flame trembled. Wind came low through the cypress. Before I could think, I put my bare hands around the glass to shield it. Exactly as I had the first night. The rain cooled my wrists. Heat touched my palms. Luciana's name gleamed dark underwater in candlelight. Behind me, Dante went very still. I knew it without turning. Slowly, I looked back at him. He was watching my hands, not my face, not the ring on my finger, my hands around the flame. And there it was, the bookend. The old wound, met again in a different body. I stood. Now you can tell me, I said softly. What happened at the grave? His gaze lifted to mine. For once, he did not evade. Did not economize himself into silence. The first night, he said. I went there prepared to hear a lie or order a burial. Rain slid along his jaw. Then I saw you burn your hands protecting my mother's candle while you were terrified of me. You saved the fragile thing first. Emotion rose so fast I had to swallow twice before words would come. In my world, he continued, everyone protects themselves first. Sensible people, trained people, men who survive. You didn't. One step closer. That was when you became dangerous to me. A laugh escaped me through tears. Dangerous? Yes. His hand came up, not to shield the flame this time, but to cover my rain-cold fingers where they still curved around the glass, because I knew right then that if I kept looking at you, I would start wanting things grief had already taught me not to want. I looked down at our hands, his over mine, the candle steady between them. Same gesture. Different world. Do you still, I asked, want them? His mouth moved by a fraction. Worse. I leaned into him then. Not dramatic, not desperate, just the simple gravity of the life we had built. He touched his forehead to mine, and for a moment, the cemetery, the city, the old blood in his name, all of it receded under rain and breath and the little stubborn flame between our hands. Little flame, he murmured, warm now, entirely. Behind us, Nico called from the path, umbrella battling the wind and losing. If you two become symbolic in the rain much longer, Rosa says the lasagna will die and then we'll all have blood on our consciences. Rosa, standing beside him with a covered dish and the patience of a saint being tested professionally, rolled her eyes. Ignore him, he thinks food has legal rights. Tomasa laughed. The sound carried clean over stone. I looked at them, our strange, damaged, alive little circle, and felt that radical, ordinary thing settle in me again. Not innocence preserved in glass, innocence changed, chosen, carrying full knowledge and still refusing to harden into cruelty. We left the grave together. Dante's hand at the small of my back, my ring catching one brief shard of gray light. The lighter heavy in his pocket, the candle burning behind us. Some emotional questions do not end just because love does. I still did not know whether choosing a man like Dante had saved the gentlest parts of me, or simply taught them how to live beside darkness without becoming it. Maybe that is what adulthood is, not purity, proximity with terms. At the gate, he stopped me under the dripping arch and kissed me once. Slow. Certain. Home. Then he opened the car door, waited for me to get in, and looked at me like the answer still cost him. I loved him enough to let my old life die. Would you have chosen Dante and let that cleaner life burn?